Hello, my name is Caroline Galeota, and this is Pluto, a planet? You decide. Okay, so for our warm-up for this discussion about Pluto, now that we've finished watching the Pluto files, it was evident to all of us that one of the biggest issues when it came to time to discuss whether Pluto would be considered a planet was the fact that no one knew how to properly define the word planet and really understand what it is, because there were so many mixed things that were going on during the time period. No one really knew how to properly define it. There were many, many, many options that could come about with this word. To start off the lesson, I would like all of us in our notes to please write down what we think the definition of the word planet, what it should actually be, in our opinion. Now that we've seen what they thought, we need to give our own opinion about what we think it should be. I would like you to compare your definition to the definitions that were discussed in the Pluto files. Do you personally agree with what was decided regarding the definition? And how do you think it affected Pluto? Do you think that it was the best thing to do, or was it a negative thing to do? Okay. Now we're going to look at some characteristics of Pluto. Just general knowledge about Pluto to get to know the planet a little bit more. Okay, so the physical characteristics of Pluto are made up of solid nitrogen ice. Its color is very brown and has a pale tint, especially when you move up towards the North Pole. And compared to the other planets in the solar system, it's adamantly smaller than all of them. It's also on the outside cusp of the solar system, which is unlike all the other planets that it is compared to. Okay, its distance from the sun is almost 40 astronomical units, and it has a radius of 1,187 kilometers. Its mass is 0.0022 meters Earth. Its density is about 1.86 grams per centimeter cubed. Now this is interesting. It has 5 moons, which is very uncommon compared to the other planets, and its surface temperature is 40 Kelvin. Now that's very, very different compared to what Earth and even Mars and all the other surrounding planets are compared to. When it's orbiting, it's also found to sometimes orbit closer to the sun than Neptune does, which is interesting too. It was known to be a planet for 75 years until a slightly larger mass known as Eris was found, and it was decided that Pluto was not large enough or dominant enough to be considered an actual planet. And here's a picture of what we think and what we know Pluto looks like as of today. Now, would you consider Pluto to be a planet? Yes or no? Explain. Okay, so for people who said yes, here's some evidence that may back up your claim. So its round shape makes people believe that it is in fact a planet because all of the planets are round. And a very good argument states that a planet must be round in order for it to actually be considered a planet. Asteroids and other objects in space are not round because there's no gravity to push them into a spherical shape. So Pluto must have some gravity in order for it to be considered a planet. It has a lot of worldly properties that right here on Earth has, such as mountains, ice plains, an atmosphere, tidal forces, and in fact some gravity in order for it to get its spherical shape. There's some belief, and so many people have biased views on this, there may have been some type of activity that has taken place on Pluto within the last 100 million years. And that's because there's been the lack of craters on the surface of the planet. It's been smoothed over and it looks almost like there's been water or rain or ice or something that has gotten rid of all the craters that would normally be on a planet that is completely desolate and has no form of seasons or life or anything like that. No? Okay, here's some more claims to back up why it may not be considered a planet. Its size is drastically smaller than all the other planets in the solar system. That's just a given fact. The radius is completely smaller and significantly smaller than Earth, Neptune, Venus, Mars, all the other planets. It has a very, very, very tipped axis, and it's not circular. We'll see later on that its axis is actually more tilted and more like an oval. It crosses the orbital path with Neptune, which is not normal for a planet to do. Normally, each planet has its own orbit that doesn't cross over with any other planets. It is also located on the very, very edge of the solar system in what is known as the Kuiper belt. And it may be considered to be too far away from the other planets and surrounded by pieces of debris like asteroids, comets, like other just floating debris that may be around it that are very similar to the makeup of Pluto, so it may just be considered to be a very big piece of debris in some people's opinions. Pluto versus the solar system. It was first discovered in 1930, and most people considered it to be very similar to the other planets, other than the fact that it was significantly smaller. Now, technology really kind of played a big part in why most people thought that it was a lot like the other planets, just because the ability to really gain knowledge and research the specific planet in comparison to other planets that are already very well known was not accessible at the time. Because it was near icy objects in the outer solar system and was much bigger than all of those pieces of debris, it was considered to be a planet. So most people, when they saw the size difference in comparison to the debris surrounding it, especially those who were able to study the planet, they considered it to be a planet just because of the massive size comparison to what was floating around it in its orbit. Now, the distance, like I said before, of the orbit varies when Pluto goes around the sun. Its elliptical orbit and large axis creates a seasonal effect on the vaporization and the condensation of the planet. So, much like Earth and, as we know now, Mars, there are seasonal changes and differences that take place when it's orbiting around the sun. And this is a lot like Earth, as we see in the 4 seasons, just based on where the Earth is orbiting in comparison to the sun during that time period of the year. Now, the orbit is a little different than Earth because Pluto's orbit lasts much, much longer than Earth's orbit because it is so much further away from the sun. The speed of the orbit also means that one pole, either the north or the south, you have to pick one or the other, is in sunlight for 248 years. So basically, its orbit, one side will be in complete darkness for almost 250 years, while the other is getting complete sunlight view because the orbit is so slow. And here's Pluto's orbit in comparison to the sun and all of the other planets. As you can see, it's tilted, it's longer, and it's not circular, and it's cutting through Neptune's orbit, which is very, very unique in comparison to the other planets. And here's Pluto's size, as we can see. In the bottom right corner is Pluto in comparison to the other planets, the Mercury, Mars, Venus, and Earth. So, as we can see, Earth is the biggest, followed by Venus, Mars, Mercury, and then Pluto's all the way down at the bottom. And Pluto is significantly smaller than Earth. Now, New Horizons. Now, this was a spacecraft that was launched in January 2006, and this was the very first trip that the world has made to Pluto. And it was a big thing. It was going to last 15 years in order for them to reach the planet. When it got there, it relied on Jupiter's gravity to gain speed in order for it to get closer to the planet as it flew. Like I said, it took 9.5 years to reach the planet. It finally reached it in 2015. Now, the only thing was, it was not able to slow down enough with the speed that it gained from Jupiter Jupiter's gravity to actually reach the planet. So it was only able to fly by and take a few pictures while it went. There were trained cameras to take the photos while it was going by, so it made it a little easier to get more than one look at the planet as they flew by. The duration of the time where they were actually in view of the planet was only a few minutes, and so the 9.5-year trip, the peak of it was over within minutes. Can't decide whether it's a planet or not. So we have an argument. It is a planet. It is not a planet. There are clues that come from other options in the Kuiper belt. Some of them include objects having known moons, just like Pluto does. There are beliefs that Pluto is actually a comet because it is composed of ice and rock. That's a very good statement to make, just because debris in space is made out of so many different things, and what makes one piece of possible debris a planet while it's something right next to it is considered to be floating debris that we don't really notice too often. It is a planet because of the seasonal changes based on the orbit around the sun. We touched upon this earlier, based on the orbit speed and how long the planet would be either in sunlight or darkness. That also depends on the seasonal change. Triton, why it is not a planet. Triton, Neptune's moon, is larger than the planet Pluto itself. Many people considered it to be too small to be a planet when the moon, that planet's moon, or one of the 5, is bigger than the actual planet. How does one become a planet if the moon is bigger? Now, here's a little plot twist. Pluto was given the term dwarf planet status. This was after 2006, once New Horizons took off and people were arguing about whether Pluto should be considered a planet or if it should not be. Its title was taken away and was granted the status of being known as a dwarf planet. What is a dwarf planet, you may ask? Well, it's created specifically for Pluto and Uranus specifically. Definition: a planetary mass that is not a planet or not a natural satellite. It orbits around the sun and has some gravity to it because of its size. It is not big enough, though, to clear the surrounding material out of its way when orbiting. Now, Pluto's not the only one who this really affects. There are about another 1 out of 6 dozen other objects in the solar system that are being studied in order to find out if they could be considered a dwarf planet or not. So there are other possible masses of rock or ice or other type of debris that are considered big enough, that have some type of gravity, have an orbit that may not be considered big enough to be a planet because it cannot clear the surrounding material while it's orbiting, but still it's a little bit bigger and more significant than just the other debris that's around it. All right, now to finish it up. Legally, Pluto is not considered to be a planet, but is known as a dwarf planet in today's scientific world. Do we think that this label will last? Or do we think that we will be calling it a planet along with the 8 others again soon? I could see it going either way, but currently right now I think that maybe it will be staying a dwarf planet, at least for a few more years to come. What do you think? Yes or no? Now, there are many creative and logical ideas that reinforce both sides of this famous argument, but it'll be up to you to really create your own idea and decide for yourself what you think.